Okay. So murder is not the same thing as killing. You might think it is initially, but look, an accidental killing is not a murder. I think there's been like a lot of confusion created in the minds of some people by the fact that in many translations of the Ten Commandments, it says thou shalt not kill, whereas a more accurate translation of the Hebrew would be thou shalt not commit murder. So my interest in this talk is not in killing as such, but in murder. So it's not killing, and not every killing is murder. Maybe killing is maybe intentional killing is murder. But if you take that view, then it pushes you fairly inevitably, though some people have disputed this, to a pacifism on which it's murder to kill combatants in a just war and for the police to kill people in defense of the innocent. And I take it that's mistaken. I don't think that's murder. So I will take that for granted. But if you have a pacifist view, then a lot of the things I say will be less relevant, but still the stuff I say about intentionality will be, I think, still relevant. Okay, so murder isn't just intentional killing. Is it maybe wrongful intentional killing? And of course, not just any wrongful intentional killing, like if I kill your dog, that's not murder, though it's a wrongful intentional killing, unless I'm being attacked by your dog or something. It's got to be a wrongful intentional killing of a person. Okay, so this is pretty close, I think. And I want to talk about three of the words in this: wrongful, intentional, and killing. And I don't want to talk about person in this talk. So I'll just take it for granted we have some concept of a person that we can plug in here. So first, killing. So I think here's one thing that seems to me fairly uncontroversial, though this is one thing I'm not 100% sure of, but close to it, is that every murder is a killing. Where I get a little bit worried is when we start wondering if there's a distinction between killing and letting die. I am personally skeptical of what are supposed to be paradigm cases of the distinction. So paradigm case of the distinction between killing and letting die is things like disconnecting patients from life support is supposed, at least in some cases, is supposed to be a letting die rather than a killing. I think that's mistaken. I think it's a killing. And here's my simple argument. If I do it to inherit their money, I've committed murder. Every murder is a killing. So it's a killing. But whether it's a killing doesn't depend on my intentions. It doesn't depend on why I've done it. That's part of what makes, killing is kind of fairly shallow, and you can have accidental killings with no intentionality whatsoever. So whether something is a killing shouldn't depend on intentions. So disconnecting a patient from life support for whatever reasons, when they die of it foreseeably and so on, seems to be killing, even if it's not to inherit their money, and even if it's not murder. And I'm not here addressing the question of whether it's permissible or not, just whether it's a killing. One thing that sort of makes me a little bit less certain of this is Rachel's drowning nephew case, where you've got a nephew who's drowning and you stand to inherit from the nephew, but the nephew is drowning in the shallow bathtub that you could pull them out of because they're really young, and you don't bother to pull them out because you want them to die. It seems like that's not killing, but it also seems like that's murder. I'm not quite sure what to say about this. I'm inclined to say that's neither killing nor murder, just badly wrong for other reasons. But that's the kind of case that worries me. So I'm not going to say much more about killing as such. I will focus on the wrongful and then especially the intentional. So wrongful. So all murder is wrongful. I take that to be definitional. But not all killing is wrongful, and not even all intentional killing is wrongful. Interestingly, it's not the case that all wrongful intentional killing is murder. It has to be wrongful in, this sounds bad, in the right way, right? It has to be non-aberrantly wrongful. So if I am under a vow of nonviolence, suppose such things make sense, and I can, and I kill in a just war as a soldier, I am not committing murder, but I'm doing something wrong, namely I'm breaking my vow of nonviolence. Another example is I'm killing in a just war, and military purposes will be served by killing either A or B, and I choose to kill A because A is a member of some minority group that I hate. I don't think that's murder, strictly speaking, because I am permitted, sort of by the laws of the war and justice and so on, to kill either one of the two. But it's wrongful because it's on the grounds of, say, race, that I have chosen which of the two people to kill. Maybe what I should have done is flipped a coin or something like that, or chosen which one is closer to me or further from me, or more conveniently killed by the methods, the military methods at my disposal, but shouldn't have been done on racist grounds. If I choose on racist grounds which of the two enemies to kill, when I have to kill one of them, I have done something wrongful, but I don't think I've done a murder if I'm permitted in other ways to kill them. So it's got to, for it to be a murder, it's got to be wrong in the right way for murder, right? It's got to be sort of murderously wrong, and it's hard to specify that, right? We want to say it's like murderously wrong, or in violation of the right not to be murdered, or so, which all of which sounds circular. So I've tried like phrasing like wrongful qua intentional killing. So maybe in the vow case, it's wrongful qua reneging on a vow. And in the racist case, it's wrongful qua act of racism, but not wrongful qua intentional killing. Or maybe it's what I want to say, something like it's in the absence of the kind of authorization that normally permits intentional killing. What that authorization consists in is a hard question that I'm not going to be addressing here. Or maybe it's a killing of someone juridically innocent in relation to the agent. I'm not sure. So whatever it is, I'm going to say, suppose we've got some kind of refinement of wrongful, and I'll just call it wrongful star, and that's wrongful in the murderous way. The thing that has led me to this talk that was puzzles about intention. I was teaching a graduate seminar on the principle of double effect, and killing is like the paradigm example in that literature, it seems like. So I'm going to understand intentions here very narrowly. So to intend something requires that it be part of my plan of action, either a means or an end. So here's a first thought. When we say that a murder is a wrongful star, or just wrongful, I'll omit the stars, I think, when reading this stuff. In a wrongful intentional killing of a person, the intentional doesn't apply to the wrongful, right? There are a few cases you can have cases of murder where the murderer intends the wrongfulness. Let's say you are being you want to join a gang and they've told you you've got to do something wrong, so you choose to do a wrongful killing. But typically the murderer doesn't care that it's wrong. They would be just as happy and sometimes even more happy to do it if it was right. Like if you want to inherit from somebody, if it turns out that it's the right thing to do to murder that person, you'd still do it. So the wrongfulness is not intended. Another thing that I think is not actually intended is that the victim is a person. That's got to be something that the murderer either knows or at least has a correct belief about. But I don't think it has to actually be intended. So here the cases get weirder, but let's say I've got a noisy neighbor who could be a human or a parrot. And so I go in with a gun, getting ready to shoot that noisy neighbor. I notice, oh, this is much too big for a parrot. It's got to be a person. But I don't care, right? I mean, it doesn't affect, I'm so callous that I don't care whether it's a human or a parrot. I just kill it because it's a noisy critter. And I know that this noisy critter is a person. Well, or I guess in the slides I say poisoned, but. So in that case, I don't intend that a person die. I intend that this victim die, and I know that the victim is a person. So intention, I think, in the wrongful intentional killing of a person idea of murder doesn't have to apply to either wrongful or person. Does it have to apply to killing? Well, it seems like that's all that's left. And specifically, I want to ask, does the murderer need to intend death to be a murderer? And I used to think so. And this forced me to bite the bullet, sorry, on a number of cases. But now I've gotten skeptical of whether the murderer needs to even intend death. So let me go through a few of my lines of reasoning for this. One is a worry that doesn't seem to get discussed much in connection with the literature on intentions and murder. We all know it's a hard metaphysical question what death is. So what do you do with killers who have a variety of views of death? And their intentions may depend on their view of death. So you can imagine the materialist who intends the destruction of the victim, the reincarnationist who intends the victim's return to the wheel of death and reincarnation, the dualist who intends to separate someone's soul from their body, or the idealist who intends the cessation of sensory experience. Are they all intending the same thing? Well, if intention is understood fairly narrowly as what forms part of their plan, it seems like you could intend one of these things without intending death. Now you might say, well, death by definition is, say, the destruction of the victim. In which case, if you say that, though, then you end up saying that the reincarnationist is not intending death. The materialist maybe, but the reincarnationist is not, the dualist is not, and the idealist is not. You could go for a different definition, but it's going to be really hard to go for a definition of death that's going to cover the materialist, the reincarnationist, the dualist, and the idealist. And yet it seems like all four of these are capable of committing murder. I mean, it would be really wonderful if only, say, materialists could commit murder. Like this would be a kind of a pragmatic argument against materialism. If you're not a materialist, you can't commit murder. Wouldn't it be great if people couldn't commit murder? So let's convince them not to be materialists. But that's surely not right. It's surely you can commit murder with all of these kinds of widespread kinds of views that large segments of the human population holds. I'm not saying that with every possible view of the metaphysics of death, you can commit murder, but it seems like these ones that tons of people have are all compatible with committing murder. So if you're intending something, what could that be that you're intending? If it's not, if you have different views of what death is. Well, one possibility could be that there is something that they are all actually intending. And I'm thinking that maybe that's the destruction of the body. And they vary these different people vary as to how the destruction of the body figures in their plan. So the atheist, sorry, why did I say atheist? I meant materialist, though they tend to overlap. The materialist thinks that the victim is the victim's body, and so the destruction of the body is the destruction of the victim. We might have some worries about the hyperintentionality of intention, whether we can go from one or to the other, but they seem really close, at least, extremely close. So maybe you could say that the materialist really does intend the destruction of the body as such, as an end. The reincarnationalist, dualist, and I think idealist all could be said to intend the destruction of the body as a means. How do you trigger the return to a cycle? You destroy the body. How do you separate the soul from the body? Well, you can't like grab the soul and grab the body and pull them apart because the soul is not material. So your only way to separate the soul from the body on dualist views is to destroy the body. And on idealism, it's kind of hard to say what exactly the body is, but maybe it's like the person qua subject of sensory experience. So maybe by intending the cessation, and so, or maybe no, it's not that. It's going to be something more complicated. It's going to be some kind of pattern of sensory experiences shared between different individuals, whatever the Berkeleyan analysis of a body is. Maybe the Berkeleyan intends to destroy that as a means to leading to cessation of sensory experience. I'm least sure of what to say about the idealist. So maybe you can say they're all intending the destruction of the body when they are killing. We do have more eccentric metaphysical views. Here's one that very few people hold, but occasionally gets discussed in the killing literature. You might think that the corpse is identical with the living body. That the corpse, you might think, I'm a material object. The corpse is a material object. The corpse is the same material object. So then you're not even, if you have this view, you can't be intending to destroy this material object by killing me, because this material object continues to exist after death. It just stops, respirating and moving about and stuff like that, but it still continues to exist. It hasn't been destroyed. And the other one is Peter van Inwagen. I don't know with what level of seriousness, but at least as a thought experiment to show that materialism is compatible with life after death, suggests here's what could happen. You die, and God snatches a chunk of your brain sufficiently large to carry you as a person along with it, transports it to heaven or hell or purgatory, as the case might be, and replaces it with a fake bit of brain in the corpse. On this view, you survive death and your body is not destroyed by death. It is just that a chunk of the brain is taken away somewhere else. I'm not quite sure what to say about intentions if you are a murderer, if you are what intuitively seems to be a murderer when you hold one of these views. I'm not completely sure that Van Inwagen, if he thought this view to be correct, would be capable of committing murder, because it does not seem to be murder to cause a chunk of someone's brain to be carried away from their body and transported elsewhere while continuing to live. Rather, it's mutilation. It's the destruction of it's the separation of it's really the amputation of the rest of the body, which is a mutilation rather than a murder. So maybe on the Van Inwagen view, there just is no such thing as death that happens to us. Or maybe we could say that what you do in murder, though, is you intend the cessation of the ordinary life of the body. And then Van Inwagen, if he held this view to be true, could still commit murder by intending the cessation of the ordinary life of the body. I'm not sure whether that's correct or not. And it seems like if murder involves intending the cessation of the ordinary life of the body, that's too philosophically complicated a formulation to think that every murderer has that intention. You have You would have to like be thinking about ordinary, the normal, and all that stuff to intend to kill in a murderous way, and that doesn't seem right. Maybe the concept of death is ostensive. Maybe we just have like this, it's kind of like a natural kind of event. And you have different theories as to what the natural kind of event is, just as maybe at some point you had different theories as to whether water was H2O, or maybe it was H3O, or H2O2, or whatever. And so you have different theories as to what it is, but you still have, by ostension, you know what water is, and by ostension, you know what event death is, and maybe in all of these cases you can intend that. But then that worries me, because what if your intention is really sharp and you say, I really want their soul to be separated from their body. I mean, look, this is not actually crazy to think that somebody might do that. So suppose you think this, I hate this person, they should go to hell. How can I send them to hell? Well, given that they're a terrible, I think they're a terrible person, and given my theological views, I bet if I separate their soul from their body, their soul is going to go straight to hell. So I will separate their soul from their body. So you could, and that seems like a completely imaginable kind of intention, and it wouldn't be surprising if some murderers had that intention, like to send somebody to hell by separating their soul from their body. And so now it seems like they're not just intending the ostensive the concept, death as the thing we ostend to, but death as that specific metaphysical thing. And you can also imagine the, you know, a Hindu murderer who really thinks, yeah, I really want them to, you know, I think they deserve to come back as an insect. I will destroy their body to make them come back as an insect. So I'm not sure what to do with that. I think I will stick for now to an intention to destroy the body. And I don't quite know what to do about Van Inwagen or the people who think that the corpse is identical with the living body. The corpse is identical to the living body maybe is a little bit easier. Maybe what I want to do is end the life of the body. And maybe that you would say, if you even if you think the corpse is identical of the living body, you would say, but it doesn't have life in it. But part of what these complications here make me wonder about is whether murderers really need to intend death, once we realize that intending death is kind of fraught just because death is a fraught concept. The more famous kinds of stuff that gets discussed here is things that go under the head of closeness in the double effect literature. So think of cases where you do something that seems really close to intending their death, but not quite, right? So the potholer case that Anscombe and others have talked about, the fat man in the mouth of the cave, and you know the water levels rising, and the only way out is to blow them to little bits. It seems like, so you could intend to blow them to little bits, intend that their body be in little bits. Little bits will come out of the door, out of the entrance more easily. You take vital organ transplants from a living donor, consenting or not. Or you behead a civilian as an act of terror, where what you want to do is to create a video of a civilian being beheaded in order to scare the enemy. And maybe it's not your intention that they die. You don't care. You want to create a video of them being beheaded because that's what scares the enemy. And them dying, you foresee that they will die, but maybe you don't care too much about that. Maybe you actually kind of think, if they don't die, it's probably going to suffer horribly, and that's going to be even worse for them. All of these cases seem to be like cases that we would intuitively judge as murder. I used to bite the bullet on the potholer case and think it's not murder. So some people, but perhaps not morally sensitive ones, might say some of these are not cases of murder, but they sure seem like cases of murder. I'm kind of, my level of certainty sort of increases as we go from the cases. The beheading as an act of terror sure seems like one. The taking out of a heart for a transplant, it seems like a murder, but slightly less. And the potholer case, I am somewhat least confident about. We could try to say, well, they're not murder, but they fall under some other moral category that's just as bad. If so, then maybe let's see if we can try to delineate what that category is, and let's call that murder star or something. But in fact, I think in ordinary language, we just call that category murder. So I will just assume that these are murder, but if not, let's see if we can say something about that category that's murder adjacent. So here's one way you can handle all of these cases. You replace the intention that the person die with the knowledge that you're unavoidably causing death. If you do that, then you lose pretty much all the cases where double effect seems to be plausible. Modern warfare becomes impossible. You can't bomb an enemy military installation because whenever there's any civilian in the area, you cannot sell medication that you know to be lethal on occasions. You cannot redirect trolleys in standard trolley cases. In fact, I think it might even be a case that intentional human reproduction may become wrong because conception invariably causes death through a long causal chain. That's somewhat more controversial, and people might have a view of causation in which that's not true. But it just seems like this just leads to pacifism, leads to incredible risk averseness in medicine, in drug manufacturing, and does not, and maybe even rules out intentional reproduction. So I'm not going to go with this. I want to try an approach that's, I guess it's inspired by Warren Quinn's paper. And Warren Quinn makes this interesting move. He's trying to get out of using the principle of double effect to handle things. And instead, he says, he formulates this principle that it's wrong to intentionally effect a harm, H, on an innocent's body when that harm is known to be lethal. And so the trick here is that all that has to be intentional is the harming of the body. You don't have to intend the lethality of the harm, and you don't have to intend the innocence of the victim. And so the thought is, could we maybe try to characterize the intentionality in murder? So remember, murder being this wrongful intentional killing of a person, the intentional part, maybe we could characterize this in something like the Quinn way. What you're doing is you don't have to be intending death, you just have to be intending a harm on a body when you know that harm to be lethal and the body to be that of an innocent. Being blown to smithereens, having your heart removed or some other vital organ, or being beheaded sure look like they're harms. They're intended to the victim, and they are lethal and known to be so by any normal human being. And presumably the human being who doesn't know them to be lethal is clearly not committing murder in these cases. But here's one thing that doesn't, I think, work in the Quinn story, namely, or the Quinn-inspired story. I don't think the murderer needs to intend this harm, H, to be a harm. Now, in some cases, they do. The terrorist who wants to terrorize by beheading somebody is indeed intending the beheading to be a harm. They are intending to put a harm on YouTube, say. But the transplant surgeon or the potholer need not intend harm. In fact, I think they need not even intend an effect on a body. What's going on? In the potholer case, there's a bunch of organic stuff. And by organic, I mean something like what organic chemistry is about. There's an organic solid blocking the doorway. And you can unblock the doorway by moving things, bits of organic stuff in different directions at random. You do that by putting a bomb in, say, and making the bits of organic stuff move in a variety of directions. It may not be, you need not care whether that organic stuff comprises a body or in fact comprises anything. You would act in exactly the same way if in fact there was just a corpse blocking the entrance. In fact, you could imagine this scenario, right? You're trying to get out of the cave, the water level's rising, and there you see in the doorway something, a dark shape. You initially think you think that's either a corpse or a person. And you think, either way, I'll blow it up. It'll get me out because you're callous. And so you set up the explosives. As you do, it starts movement. You notice some movement, but you don't care. It doesn't affect any part of your plan of action. It doesn't need to require you to change the placement of the explosives in any way. And you don't care. It seems like you're not intending any effect to a body, or at least body here meaning living body, not in the sense of dead body. I take it body is equivocal between living and dead body. Likewise, I don't think the surgeon needs to intend to take the heart from the body. Look, there's a heart. It's attached by some stuff. I'll cut the stuff it's attached by and take it. Again, callous. So it seems like the callous transplant surgeon or potholer need not intend harm or need not intend any effect to a body. So it seems to me that the Warren Quinn story has too much intention to be able to handle these cases. The deep insight I think that Quinn has is that lethality needed to be moved from the scope of intention to the scope of knowledge when trying to figure out what is wrong in a murder. But we also have to keep something in the scope of intention. If we don't keep something in the scope of intention, we lose all the cases where double effect is plausible. So it seems to me that you might get something interesting and something plausible if you move even more things from intention to knowledge. Namely, move the harm and the effect on the body to something that the agent knows but need not intend. But you still have to keep something in the scope of intention. So here's my suggestion, and maybe this doesn't work, but it goes like this. An agent acts so I want to define this concept of what I'll call a homicidal intention. So you act with a homicidal intention when you intend a state of the universe, when you know that state to be a lethal harm of a person. So take the potholer case. Assuming you have normal adult human knowledge, you know that you intend these molecules to be moved apart. You also know that these molecules are the molecules of a person, and the state of them being moved apart is a lethal harm of a person, and you know it. Likewise, in the beheading case, you know that the state of the universe you intend that the head be separated from the rest of the body. So you intend that the head be separated from the rest of the body. In this case, you are intending an effect on the body. And you know that to be a lethal harm. Similarly, with the transplant surgeon who removes the vital organ, you know that that the heart not being attached or being detached from the body is a lethal harm. You intend this detachment, which is in fact a lethal harm. So you have a homicidal intention. And then I say you say that an agent commits murder if and only if the agent wrongfully kills by fulfilling a homicidal intention. One worry is the more we move out of the scope of intention to the scope of knowledge in a definition of murder, the more cases we're going to include as murders. I don't think that the standard cases for double effect are like that. So the tactical bomber who drops a bomb on a military target intends a state of the universe, which is what? It's a state of intense heat. It's a state of, air movement. These states cause a lethal harm to civilians, but they are not themselves a lethal harm to civilians. On the other hand, the tactical bomber may well intend something that they know to be a lethal harm to the combatants. They may intend the combatants' bodies to be ripped apart and so on. They may even intend them to be dead. So that's my suggestion, is we keep enough in the scope of intention, but much less than Quinn kept. It is difficult to explicate what a lethal harm is. And there's a worry that some of the problems we've had are going to come back. This is where we get to the I really don't quite know what to say stage, not quite there yet. Initial attempt, harm is lethal provided that it has to actually lead to death or else it's not lethal. But it also has to maybe do so normally. It has to be something that normally leads to death, not just due to a freak case. And I think it has to do so qua the harm it is. So bleeding in the presence of sharks maybe normally and actually leads to death, but doesn't do so qua the harm it is. There's kind of a way in which you can die from bleeding qua the harm it is, namely when you bleed to death. But when your blood just attracts sharks, that doesn't seem to be that kind of a thing. So it may well be that bleeding in the from a minor cut in the presence of a shark is not a lethal harm in this sense. Likewise, a hangnail might get infected and lead to death, but it doesn't normally lead to death. So that doesn't count as a lethal harm. On the other hand, the severe infection that it leads to might be a lethal harm. Here's the thing that's making me most puzzled. It's a case by one of my students, Harrison Lee. You're shackled by a leg to a tree. There is a bomb near your family who are out of your reach. Your family are unable to disable the bomb. You are able to disable the bomb. The only way to get to your family is to cut off your leg and crawl to your family. Heroically, you do so. There is no medical help nearby. You eventually bleed to death, as you foresaw. Having something as large as your leg normally leads to death. It doesn't always lead to death because we've got great medicine that can keep it from leading to death. But in the absence of the great medicine, it actually leads to death. So it normally and actually leads to death, it seems. But it doesn't seem to be a suicide. And if you think it is, maybe we could change the leg to a toe. But it just doesn't seem like suicide. Doesn't seem like self-murder. And yet it seems to meet the definition. You're intending what? You're intending the separation of the lower part of your leg from the upper part of your leg. that separation, it seems to be a lethal harm. I'm somewhat hopeful that there's a way of finessing the concept of lethal harm so that it doesn't count as a lethal harm. I have this intuition that lethality, there's kind of immediacy in lethality, in lethal harm, that's not present in the leg case. I feel an intuitive difference between amputating a leg and amputating a heart. The heart is a vital organ, its removal kills more immediately. The lack of a heart is in itself a lethal harm. The lack of a leg doesn't seem to be a lethal harm, but I'm not quite sure. Immediacy seems to be a vague concept. I'm not happy with putting in something that vague in murder. I mean, think of something like, sort of this continuum. So there's like removing your heart. What about removing your kidney? Suppose the data shows that for people with your, whatever fine-grained demographics, if you remove a kidney, you die 5 years earlier and you donate a kidney. Is the loss of the kidney lethal? No, it's not immediate enough. But what if you die within minutes after donating the kidney? Well, now it seems like it's lethal. So, but it can't be just the amount of time. In fact, you can have killings, murders that take a long time, like that guy who took the bullet for Reagan, who died, what was it, like 30, 40 years later. So I don't quite know what to say, but I think there's some kind of intuitive condition of immediacy and lethality that I don't know how to capture that may do the job. My hope is that Harrison Lee will figure this out because he wants to do a dissertation on killing, but we'll see. Okay, so putting it together, a murder is a wrongful star intentional killing. Wrongful star means something like wrongful qua intentional killing. Intentional killing means killing in fulfillment of a homicidal intention. A homicidal intention is where you intend a state of the universe that you know, or maybe just correctly believe, that's another question, whether we want know or correctly believes, to be a lethal harm of a person. And a lethal harm is one that both normally and actually, maybe relatively immediately, leads to death, qua the harm it is. It's kind of a messy definition. And it seems, and so it leads me to this kind of interesting meta question of what kind of ethical views could morality have such complex prohibitions as this, but it seems really inelegant. I kind of wanted to follow from simpler and more elegant premises, but I don't know what more to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Extremely fertile talk. Normally we'd like to clap, but in this strange Zoom world, I don't quite know what the protocol is. So we're going to put this talk
Jorge
up
knows what the protocol is.
We're going to put this talk up on the BIOS Center website, which I encourage you to visit, and also Alex's blog. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague, Fiona Doherty, who's going to chair the question and answer session. So she'll explain how that works. She's a senior research fellow here at BIOS. I'll hand over to her now.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks, Professor Pruss, for that talk. Really enjoyed it. So I think we'll try and keep normality as much as possible. Just go with a hand system. So you can just raise your hand, or if you're not quite able to do that, just put your name in the chat or something, and I'll make a note, and then we can work through you. So I see Garcia there. You snuck in with a hand up before I'd finished, so I think that qualifies you to answer the first question. And everyone else, I'm just going to make the list, so keep your hands up. That's it. Got you, Matthew. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump the line
there.
No,
there was no line.
So these thoughts are quite incomplete. I don't really know where they lead, nor whether they support or pose problems for your view, or neither, but just let me toss out a couple of complications. So there's a question of, I guess, state of affairs identity. I don't really know what the theories are or metaphysics of that is, right? Because it seems that the approach that you're proposing puts a lot of stock in whether a certain state of the universe, that is the content of the agent's intention, is identical with a lethal harm. So, I mean, there's a question, as you said, about lethality. Is it that the harm, is it that the state of the universe is one that tends to cause death? So it's just something that is normally, well, something that constitutes a cause of death? Or is it something that entails the victim's death? Or is it something stronger than that, that is the same thing as, that is identical with the victim's death? So that's one issue. And an issue that arises that from that, or that's tied to that, although I think it's a broader one, there I use the term death. Well, does death mean the event of dying or the state of being dead? You have it set up so that the content of the intent is a state, but there are views in the literature where what is intended is itself an action or maybe omission of the agent. The agent may intend that for the sake of something outside the agent, but the content of the intent is always a condition and maybe even an event involving the agent. I mean, you could probably read Aquinas like that, right? You intend the end through a means, but a means is something one employs, and I take it the means in Aquinas, I'm no expert in Aquinas, so I'm just tossing out a possibility. It might be that the means is always some kind of a bodily, or if not bodily, at least event of the in the agent, a change of mental state or a change of bodily state. So I guess there are a couple of different things I'm tossing out there. One is the question about the criteria of state of affairs identity, right? That was the first point. When is a state of the world identical with a lethal harm? The second issue is the idea of a lethal harm. Is it just a state that is lethal, a state of the body or of the person, the victim, that is lethal to her in the sense of causing death? Or is it causing the event of dying, or is it the state of the victim being dead? And then the other set of issues I was trying to raise have to do with how we should properly think about the content of intent. Is the intent, in fact, always an event, never simply a state? By an event, I mean a change of the condition of the world, or a maintaining of the condition of the world. I guess von Wright gives an elaborate, taxonomy, I guess, of events. But is it something that at least has two terms? The world either changing from S1 to S2, remaining being at S1 at time 1 and at S1 in S1 at time 2, and so on. So does it always involve two terms, an event in that sense, or is it simply a state? And then there's a question also about the narrower suggestion that not only does an intention always have to be for an event, not of a state, but it has to be specifically, at least immediately or pretty immediately, a condition of the agent herself. So she intends to do this, raise her arm, leave her arm down, in order that something else happen outside of her. So as I said, pretty inchoate, but I just wanted to toss those out as some complications that maybe you'll be able to exploit to, in defense of double effect, or maybe they just generate more problems and make things harder. I just don't know. So that's as far as I've thought so far.
I was trying to use state not in a technical sense, but as a fairly broad concept. So so an event is going to be a state as well.
Oh, okay.
The first part, when I think of a lethal harm, I'm thinking of it. One kind of lethal harm would be, I guess, something that is death or constitutes dying. But I take it that I want this to sort of match our ordinary usage of lethal harm, and we say things like a beheading is a lethal harm.
Right.
Now, a beheading is not constitutive of death. I take it that you survive a beheading briefly until your brain runs out of oxygen, which is very soon, but it's probably not instant after the sword cuts through the neck. So I take it that a beheading is a lethal harm by immediately, and that part worries me, normally and actually causing death. So I think many cases of lethal harm are mere causes of death. Some may actually be death itself.
Where by death you mean dying or being dead?
Either one, actually, I suppose, right? I mean, suppose someone prays to a demon that someone be dead. Then what is the state they are intending? The state of that person being dead. Or they could pray to a demon that the person should die. Then it's the process of dying, then it's the transition of dying that is intended. And it seems to me I'll count both of those as lethal harms, being dead or dying. They would be lethal harms if it actually worked.
Okay, quite happy. Matthew?
Yes, thank you. So thank you, Alex. It was great. I would be interested on your position on death penalty and the link between death penalty and murder. Couldn't one consider it wrongful, but still not call it murder? Would that be a possibility for you?
That's not a view that's that far from mine. I'm inclined for theological reasons, namely recent papal pronouncements, to think that under current circumstances it is not permitted. But my inclination to think is it's not permitted is because we've got actually currently like obligation in our time. We've got like obligations of mercy, which may sound odd, but I think we've got like these obligations of mercy. They're not obligations of justice. And so there's nothing, on my view, unjust about the death penalty in certain cases. But nonetheless, we're obligated to be merciful in these cases. And when we fail to be merciful in these cases, that's very much like my vow of nonviolence kind of case. Or maybe you could have a case, right, where a judge has promised to pardon somebody and then they break that promise. That's not murder. I guess that one is against justice because it's been promised, but it's not like the justice. It's not the killing as such that's unjust. It's the promise breaking that's unjust. So yeah, so I guess that's my view, is that is that in some cases at least it's not murder. I mean, in some cases it is murder, right? I mean, if say that the person didn't do the crime, or the crime isn't one that merits death, or the things like that, right? Then it is just murder. But I think in the standard cases, it's where it's currently practiced, it's violates an obligation of mercy.
Harrison?
I think, is Mark Murphy still here? No? Okay.
Yeah,
'cause
yeah, yeah.
He's
'cause
waving.
he had his hand up, so
Oh,
I
sorry,
just
I
wanna-
must have missaw that. That's very noble of you, Harrison. Do you
Okay.
want to go for it, Mark?
You're muted, Mark, though.
Oh, I didn't know. I didn't know that. Really, Harrison, you could have gone ahead. That's fine. But I'll try to be quick. So first out, I want to register a quick suspicion, and then I have the real question. The quick suspicion is that I sort of doubt that the resolution to Harrison's case is going to come through stuff like lethality and immediacy, because it seems like in cases where the person who does the cutting off is not the person who's in the trap, but somebody else wandering by, I would not at all be disinclined to call it murder. So it strikes me it's more likely to come from something about the wrongfulness condition rather than something about lethality and immediacy, which would hold regardless of whether or not the person who does the cutting is oneself or someone else. That's just a little suspicion. The real question I wanted to ask was about the wrongfulness condition and why you include it at all in the definition of murder. I mean, so think about, similar sorts of worries that we have, like cases like where we're trying to figure out how to define lying or something like that. We don't want to describe this in sort of moralized terms. We want to describe it in such a way such that it remains an open question, whether it's wrongful and in what way it's wrongful. But you include the wrongfulness as part of the definition. And I also, think that it should be, a couple of considerations in favor of this. I think that it should be an open question whether or not it could be okay to commit murder in some cases. That, if there are really, really, really bad consequences to not committing a murder, it may be that the thing to do is to commit a murder. Now, I think that's a false view, but I don't think it should be ruled out definitionally. The other thing is that it strikes me that it should be possible to admit the existence of murder in the world, even if one's a moral nihilist. You could say, oh yeah, murders happen, but but of course there's nothing wrong about it because there's nothing wrong at all in the world. So I'm wondering sort of what do I gain? Why do I need to have something like a moralized conception of murder rather than just defining it without, at least without such a strong moralization condition where it basically seems to sort of presuppose that the action's going to have some moral status if it exists at all.
Yeah, I've never thought of that. I guess I've just taken it for granted that it's definitional, that murder is wrong. And it's an interesting disanalogy with lying and cheating and possibly stealing.
But why do you need it though? Do you just think that's just what it means, or do we get something?
Every so often I get accused of being an ordinary language philosopher, and I think there is something to that accusation.
Yeah.
So to some degree, I am doing some ordinary language philosophy here, trying to come up with something that fits what people say. But yeah, maybe even as ordinary language, you might be right too.
Yeah.
Your case of the amoralist as.
I wonder whether or not there may be some kind of moralized condition that doesn't, some sort of, something kind of normative in it, but doesn't entail that the action has a moral status of being negative, like something like unauthorized killing.
Yeah, I probably is going to entail it in the sense that in every possible world where the conditions met, it's wrong, but it may not be relevant entailment or something, or logically, sort of logically strict one. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, okay, so how about this? Wrongful star could also be a non-moralized thing that happens to be necessarily coextensive with being wrongful in the murderous way. But I don't know what it is, because that's a really hard question of what exactly the kind of authority that is needed to kill intentionally is. And so, yeah, so you fill it out with, so yeah, you could fill it, so there's presumably a story, right, as to what kinds of things render an intentional killing wrong, and then you could have that story be in place of a wrongful star.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Alex. Great talk.
I like that idea.
Great, and now Harrison.
Okay, thank you. So, all right, I have I guess two related ideas here. The first is, I think that my case gets harder even if you imagine that the person is cutting off his leg in order to avoid a boulder which is coming down a mountain and it's going to kill him, right? So he's actually cutting off his leg knowing that he will die from the leg wounds, but in order to prolong his life just a little bit longer, then it seems really clear that he's not intentionally killing himself. And perhaps maybe you could just take that on board and say, yeah, he's not intentionally killing himself, but it's still self-murder. Or if it was another person coming along, cutting off his leg in order to prolong his life, you know, so that he can avoid the boulder, I don't think that that would be an intentional killing because it would be done with the express purpose of prolonging his life. And it seems a bit more strained to call it murder. I think you can apply this same reasoning even to cases where, and this is the second point, where the organ that's being removed is a vital one, is the heart, for example. So say you're trying to crack, you're touring and you're trying to crack a code that's going to be extremely beneficial in bringing down the Nazis. So you have a heart condition and it's going to kill you immediately unless you remove the heart. If you remove the heart, you'll have like 1 extra second where you could figure out this problem and communicate it to somebody. So you remove the heart in order to prolong your life, knowing that it will kill you. Then it seems, again, more strained to say that it's an intentional killing or a murder. So I just wonder what you have to say about those kinds of cases where the reason that the organ is being removed is to prolong one's own life.
That's really cool. I think I can escape that. I never thought of these cases, but it seems like by coincidence, I think the formulation may be able to escape it because, so take your first case, the boulder case, it's not actually a harm. You benefit from it on balance and benefit in a bodily way, right? And now you could say, well, yeah, but it is a harm. I mean, it hurts, right? And it bleeds and so on, all that stuff. And it might actually hurt more than being crushed by the boulder, which is probably a quick way to go. Yeah, that sounds right too. But then it doesn't kill quite the harm it is, maybe.
Yeah.
So it seems like these cases you can kind of finesse by the harm part of the constraint. Maybe some cases it'd be a little less clear, but it doesn't seem like it's lethal harm in this case. I mean, part of it is I'm not confident of how to define lethal harm. That's like one of the parts I'm really not confident about. But I'm fairly confident that we wouldn't say that's a lethal harm when it's a life prolonging thing.
Even if it leads to your
death? Even if you die
though?
from it, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Because being conceived is not a lethal harm.
Yeah, but I also don't think that that's the cause of death, right?
Maybe if you think that life is on balance good, but even if life on balance were bad, I don't think you would want to say that being conceived is a lethal harm. It's lethal and it's harmful if you've got the pessimistic view of human life, or the pessimistic view is correct, but it's not, I think, a lethal harm. It doesn't kill by, so what makes being conceived harmful on this pessimistic antinatalist view is that, well, life's miserable, right? But it doesn't kill you by life being miserable. It just kills you because life, our cell leads to death.
Life leads to death temporally, though, not causally.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, what's at least if you think of death as the process of dying that Jorge Garcia was talking about, then, it's like, you've got these cells and they make lots of copies of themselves. The copies go wrong, and this is all part of life in the species we are in.
All right, thanks, Alex.
And Matthew Norris? I think he's gone. Jump to Cal Miller.
Hi, thanks Alex for the talk. really stimulating. I guess just curious because I think I still don't fully understand the view that you're putting forward, but to help me understand it, I'm wondering if you could comment on 3 cases which I guess are particularly salient in the context of beginning of life ethics. So how would this work out in, firstly, the case of abortion, secondly, the case of abortifacient contraceptives like intrauterine devices, and then thirdly, the classic violinist case. I'm just wondering if it would be, if all of those would count as murder on your view, or only some, or how exactly it would work out.
So there is empirical data that typical cases of abortion in Western countries are motivated by motives that require the death of the fetus. So I think there the death is just intended in typical cases. What do I mean by that? What are the typical cases? It's things like not having the financial resources to raise the child, and at the same time not being willing to have the child be raised by someone else. So that seems like the solution to that. The abortion solves that problem by killing the fetus. If the fetus is a person, if the fetus is not a person, right, these questions don't come up. I said I wouldn't talk about personhood. So let's just take it for granted the fetus is a person for these questions. If the fetus is a question, then I think in those cases, in the typical cases, death is just intended. Now that's not true of every case of abortion. So in cases where, in a number of the therapeutic cases where it's done to save the mother's life, which are rare, or maybe to, the intention maybe is just to remove the fetus from the uterus, right? So, and that's how the violinist case is originally set up. It's the intention there is to disconnect the violinist from its life support. Those are just, so that was the first thing I want to say. Those are not actually the paradigm case, the most common cases when you do surveys of women and ask them the reasons for abortion. Mere removal of the fetus with the fetus surviving would not satisfy the reasons for that women report for having abortions. But it would in these therapeutic cases, it might also do so in non-Western countries where the fact of unwed pregnancy itself, makes one subject to opprobrium and so on. And there, the end of the pregnancy as such is what's going on, as well as the more rare cases where people are just afraid of pregnancy as such, or pregnancy as such interferes with their life. But that's actually doesn't get reported on the opinion polls of women who have had abortions, at least not in the US. So what about these cases where it's removal of the fetus? And there, I think it is actually harder to think. I'm inclined to think that that it is a lethal harm to be removed, to be disconnected from the uterus, if you're a fetus, at least at a certain stage in your development. And so then in this case, assuming the fetus is a person, it's going to count. And assuming it's wrongful, this would be a case where it might be useful to have a non-moral sense of wrongful. It would count as murder. I mean, part of it, right, is that there is an effect. So you wonder, like, what if would you just be removing the fetus as a whole? How are you intending any effect on the, yeah, that's interesting. Are you intending any effect on the fetus's body then? It's not clear, right? You're just changing their location. Well, but in practice, actually, right, you're cutting through the, you're destroying the connection. The connection is actually part of the fetus's body, like I say, the umbilical cord. So you are actually in practice affecting the body. I guess you could imagine a kind of Star Trek type abortion where you beam out the fetus with umbilical cord with the placenta, sort of all the things that are genetically part of the fetus get beamed out. And then the fetus dies, of course, from that not being connected. That's interesting. I think on this view, that might not actually count as a murder, and that might be a problem for the view if you think that conditionally on the fetus being a person, that is a murder. And it was actually making me think of is, you know, say, if you watch science fiction, right, people talk of spacing as a form of killing, where you send somebody out into the vacuum of space. And again, it's, what if you just want them out of your ship? Is that murder to space them? I'm now worried that the view says no, and I'm not sure that's correct. But on the other hand, maybe that is the right answer. It seems like there are sets of intentions, at least under which spacing isn't murderous. Like, you know, you've got two people, there's enough air for one. And you make some just decision as to which one is going to get spaced, say by drawing lots or something. And then maybe the one who drew the short stick refuses to go, so you space them. But you're not intending that they die. I wonder if you could do something like that. And yeah, the case of abortion might be also complicated by its being a more of an ordinary sustenance case than the case of oxygen in a spaceship. But
I'm just wondering in that case, and I know other people have written about this, but viewing pregnancy as a special role may actually change your view of what counts as murder or not. So
that's what I was thinking.
In particular areas, there are special obligations which aren't present in many other areas, and here they're actually physically very closely bonded in a particular way that's ordinary, extraordinary.
I wonder though if that's going to make it murder, right? So it might make it wrong, but I wonder if it would make it murder, because it seems in the kinds of cases where the reason that the killing is wrong is due to a special obligation of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be like a special obligation, say, not to make racist decisions. Maybe it's not actually murder, it's something else.
Yeah.
Or your special obligation to fulfill your vows if you're under a vow of nonviolence.
I suppose this is a suggestion, would roles affect whether something counts as murder or not? I mean, how we relate to other people in certain situations is going to actually change even what counts as murder. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that would be interesting.
Thought,
So, I mean, you might ask this question, like, maybe could it be murder to space your child, but not to space a stranger? Even if both were wrong. Yeah. I don't know.
They depend on the child.
Great. So I know you have to go soon, Professor. So I'm just gonna get the question at the end of the list, which is in fact myself. I was just wondering very quickly about how weak you think you can make the intention that you played around with in a very interesting way. So I'm wondering cases where people, they see red and they murder lots of people. Or say that you have a case where there's someone who, because say of like some sexual fetish, engages in like some practice like strangulation, where they don't intend a lethal degree of strangulation, but in fact get carried away, and that is the outcome. So they have committed murder there, but it doesn't seem to quite fit the definition, because they haven't intended the precise state of affairs that came about into the world, but they, you know, this becomes a kind of closeness worry that you had for the earlier double effect example. So I'm wondering what your intuitions are about that kind of case.
I mean, there may be some counterexamples to what I'm about to say, but it seems to me that a necessary condition for No, I just saw a counterexample coming. But what I was going to say is this, and I'll tell you why it doesn't work, and then maybe we can talk some more. I was going to say that a necessary condition is that at least you foresee that death will come from it. That's not quite right, because it seems like you can commit a murder by playing Russian roulette with somebody. but I think in the case like of the strangulation, I think that's like, maybe more recklessness, like recklessness than murder, because it's not, I assume it's not intended to produce to involve the degree of strangulation that has a reasonable chance of causing death.
Yes, or else you could use your second condition to say something like you're engaging in a practice that you know might lead to, or like sometimes encompasses a lethal harm, like if you get carried away kind of caveat.
Yeah, I mean, what I think, I don't quite know, know. I think carried away covers a multitude of things. And I mean, there are going to be cases of carried away where it's compatible with responsibility and one knows what's going on, but one's acting on reasons that under normal circumstances one wouldn't have acted on. But then there will be cases of being carried away where it just describes some kind of temporary insanity where no intentions are involved. So I think that's going to be one of those things where it's going to be really hard to tell. And
you don't think that you can commit murder under temporary insanity without an intention?
Yeah, I don't. I guess not. I think you need some sort of intention. But that's also an interesting question for Mark's worries about whether the definition should be morally neutral. Yeah, what to do about the case of insanity. I mean, it depends on what the insanity consists in, I think, too. Right, so there are going to be forms of insanity that don't actually render the act wrong, where, so you insanely think that this person is attacking you when they are just smiling in a friendly way.
Yeah, I'm thinking more of run amok cases.
Doing it in self-defense. They're just acting in self-defense, right?
Totally, yeah.
And that's not murder.
Yeah.
But then there will be other kinds of insanity. Like, I don't know.
It's a tough one, insanity, yeah. Listen, I don't want to deprive any students of logic.
Yeah, I need to go to another building and be there in 9 minutes, so I should go. But thank you, everyone. I have a lot more stuff to work on, or maybe Harrison has a lot of stuff to work on.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Alex. And I should give a round of applause. I don't know how to press the button, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So much.
We're very honored to have Alex, one of our patrons of the BIOS Center. And if anybody missed any of the talk, we will have it recorded. So I'll make sure that you get a copy. And well, I hope, as with all our BIOS seminars, it's allowed people to discuss ideas to feed into future work. So we've certainly had some fruitful discussions tonight. Colombo will never be the same again, I think. Thank you very much indeed, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody.